Do you guys have that fun little countdown too? Yay! Okay, lovely. We will get started in just a couple minutes. Thank you so much to everyone who is joining us. We have a couple of announcements just as people are logging on today. First, we are recording this session and it will be available here in Excel Events for the next 30 days and then on the Alliance's YouTube channel after that. Secondly, if you would like to ask a question during this session, please make sure and use the chat or the Q&A area to the right of the viewing window. If you'd like to access English or Spanish captions or Spanish audio translation, please use the widget below this viewing screen or use the link that we have just dropped into the chat to access them in a separate browser window. Finally, this is a webinar type of breakout session. The speakers will not be able to see you, but they will be able to see your chat and Q&A comments in the panel on the right. So please feel free and use those throughout the session. It looks like we are more than ready to get started, so I am going to hand it over to our speakers to begin.
Hello, I'm going to kick it off. Can you hear me okay? Hi, everyone. My name is Liza Lieberman. I am Vice President of Public Affairs at MAZON, a Jewish response to hunger. And I'm so delighted to be with all of you today. And I'm really honored and delighted to be here with two of my friends, Eileen Hupp, the National Military Family Association, and Heather Campbell, who is a stalwart advocate for military families. I just want to begin with a little bit of background, and I apologize for any background noise that you might be experiencing. Um, I want to give a little bit of background about MAZON's involvement. MAZON is a national anti-hunger organization that has been working for 40 years to help build the anti-hunger advocacy infrastructure in this country. We work both at the federal and state level, and we work with many organizations around the country, in particular in some of the most food insecure states in the country and places where advocacy is, I was going to say increasingly difficult, but I think advocacy on these issues is difficult almost everywhere right now, including at the federal level, of course. So about, I think now it's about 12 or 13 years ago, my boss, she was at the time a new president CEO, was at another anti-hunger conference, and she heard a story, kind of almost an anecdote actually, in a workshop about increasing numbers of military families um, seeking food assistance from the food pantry. I believe it was in San Diego at the time. And she kind of was like, whoa, why is that a thing? That seems like that shouldn't be a thing. And she looked into it, and and one of the ways MAZON works is that we can kind of dig in hard and go deep. on issues and populations where we think there might be a policy barrier. So this is one way that she followed up with the person who mentioned this and understood that it was absolutely true. There are increasing numbers, and there still are, unfortunately. Spoiler alert, we haven't solved it yet. That's why we're here to talk about it. There were at the time, and there still are, increasing numbers of military families that are seeking emergency food assistance. And we've actually found, and we'll talk about here today, that there are some policy barriers that exist for that reason. There are also just some unique reasons that military families, and similarly, but not exactly the same, the veterans also face food insecurity. And there's a lot of misinformation and a lot of rhetoric about this, and the issue is very complex. That's why we have named this session Understanding the Complexity of These Issues. Um, as with many things, it's not a one size fits all. It's not that every military family's story is the same, every veteran's experience is the same. So I really think that our small but mighty panel we have put together today is well equipped to start to address some of these complexities. And then we look forward to hearing from you from any questions, anything you're hearing and seeing in the field. But first, I want to hand things off to my friend. I think we're starting with Heather Campbell. If you could, Heather, speak a little bit about what you've seen of the unique needs of military families that might not always be evident to civilians, to those of us who are not directly affiliated with military community.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me as part of the panel. I an advocate for military families, and I am what I would call, I borrow this term from a friend of mine, an accidental advocate. I did not grow up planning to be the voice of such a sometimes often unpopular topic, but my family, as a young military family on one income, went through food insecurity. We struggled, and here's a spoiler alert, we're an officer family. So when we were a young family, we moved to a remote, difficult location. It was really expensive. I couldn't find childcare that covered the cost of, or I couldn't find work, that covered the cost of childcare. And we had student debt, and all of these things together made for a really stressful time. And as you guys know, food insecurity is different from hunger, right? It's just not being sure that you're going to have what you need at the end of the day, the end of the week, the end of the month. And before, marrying my husband, I'm a registered dietitian who specializes in family and pediatric nutrition. I had worked for the WIC office before, and before becoming a dietitian, I worked in finance. So I know budget and I know how to feed people, and we still couldn't make all the numbers work. And there was a lot of that mental load of, what am I doing wrong? We're college educated, we're officers, and I know how to do this. Obviously, we must be the problem, right? And it wasn't until years later, as I got out of that season, started exploring more of, why is this happening to families? If this is happening to my family, what's happening to enlisted families, younger families, uneducated families on some of these life skills? And what we have found in this community, there's a lot of us advocates from sort of different angles working in this arena. And the Military Family Advisory Network had some data of, okay, we see food insecurity is happening. And so they did some deep digging of why. What are the causal factors? And I sat in on their release, and they had 6 causal factors. And my camera was off, thank goodness, because I was weeping. This is years later. I was weeping because I felt so seen. So I'm going to share those with you guys, and I'll make sure to put these in the chat as well. But the 6 most common causal factors they sort of group together are, first one, spousal unemployment. We know that 2/3 of Americans agree that you need 2 incomes to function, yet we have spousal unemployment in the military community that is about 20 to 25%, and that's largely unchanged over the last 10 years. So we continue to struggle to get work. That makes it hard to make ends meet. Having a recent move, relocating, we know it costs between $2,000 and $5,000 per move out of pocket of unreimbursed expenses. Little sneak peek for you. I moved 3 times in 3 years. 2 of those were overseas and back. Those were about $8,000 each out of pocket that the military didn't cover. So those things, when you only have one income and then you work really hard to get some savings and it gets wiped out in a move that you don't have a choice in, that factors in. Growing your family. So whether you're adopting, having kids, bringing in a spouse, having another mouth to feed, shocker, makes money more stressful. unexpected expenses. So having a house flood like we did in my house here last winter, we came home from Christmas break and found out a pipe had burst while we were gone. So that was an unexpected expense right after the holidays. Military families don't have the resources to withstand those things because they so frequently get like wiped out with not having work and those frequent moves. And then two other ones. One is the rising cost of living, which we see across the board across all Americans. It just impacts us a little differently because we're constantly relocating in the military community. So we're always renting or buying at the top of the market and don't necessarily have the opportunity to still be living in a house we've been in for 10 years with some equity and a mortgage that we got 10 years ago. So we're always at the top of the market when it comes to that housing cost. And then also, we don't have the resources typically, for these families who have experienced food insecurity. They aren't able to withstand an external system shock. So a hurricane, a wildfire, an earthquake, a government shutdown, those kinds of things really impact us differently. So a lot of these, finding work, childcare, growing your family, moving, those are regular expenses for Americans, but those are things in our community that we're experiencing on repeat quite frequently. And all of those together can create this environment of food insecurity that might be just short term until the next promotion or until you get reimbursed for the move. But sometimes it's longer until you move to a new location or until you get the next promotion in rank. So one of the things that makes food insecurity tricky for our community is that it's no one pain point for the same family. And even within the same family, it can be different seasons. When we were young, it was I couldn't find work. Last January, it was the house flood and the house deductible right after the holidays. So you can still have these different stressors coming in. The underlying theme is that we see that a lot of military families don't have the support system or the finances to withstand some of those stressors, the same as we would if we were civilians and we had sort of that opportunity to build up a nest egg or to have some stability in our lives. But that is not what the military community is known for. And then, during the shutdown, our paychecks were sometimes questionable if we were going to get those. And so all of those things together make it just a little bit more complex to understand in the military community specifically. And then the veteran side is a whole nother conversation that we'll get into a little bit later. Okay, I'm going to turn it back over to you, Liza.
Thank you so much, Heather. Thank you so much. I want to hand it over to Eileen. Eileen Huck is Acting Director of Government Relations, at the National Military Family Association. Eileen, can you tell us, first of all, a little bit about NMFA, if you'd like, and then talk about some of the policies we've been fighting for together at the federal level?
Of course. Thank you, Liza. And thank you, everybody, for being here and being interested in this topic. We really appreciate it. And thank you to Heather for such a compelling and comprehensive overview of why it is that so many military families are struggling with food insecurity. So real briefly, the National Military Family Association is a nonprofit organization that advocates on behalf of service members and their families. We have been around since 1969, so we're one of the oldest military service organizations that are focused exclusively pretty much on military families. And over the years, we have worked on really every issue that might impact a military family's quality of life. Everything from pay and compensation to the military health system to children's education to military spouse employment. But about 8 or 10 years ago, we became very aware of the issue of food insecurity among the military community. And we've been really pleased and privileged to have partnered with MAZON, who are very much thought leaders in this arena, to help us become educated on the causes of and solutions for food insecurity. And they've been great partners as we've advocated for solutions across the, across the range of policy recommendations. So I think Heather really articulated why it is that so many military families struggle financially to the point that they experience food insecurity. And part of what we've done over the years is talk about what solutions we can put forward to address this. One thing that I think it's important for the audience to be aware of is that it's very difficult for military families to qualify for SNAP benefits because their housing allowances are included as counted income in determining eligibility. In most locations, for most families, that puts them over the eligibility threshold. And so what that has meant is that for in an environment where we know that up to 25% of military families are experiencing food insecurity, those same families aren't able to access the most robust nutrition program that might help them with that issue. And so one thing that we have advocated for is eliminating the basic allowance for housing in determining SNAP eligibility, so that allowance would not be included as counted income, which would increase the number of families who might potentially qualify for SNAP benefits. I will note that, for WIC, which is another great resource for families experiencing food insecurity, the housing allowance is not typically included as counted income, and that has made it easier for military families to access WIC. And my organization has tried very much to raise awareness of WIC as a resource for young military families. But we feel like SNAP should be a resource for them as well. But because it's not currently, we've turned to other avenues to try and address the financial issues that are facing military families. And one policy that we've been championing for the past several years is called the Basic Needs Allowance. And that is an allowance that is for families currently whose household sizes and incomes place them below 200% of federal poverty guidelines. And that is something that the Department of Defense is supposed to be an allowance that they're supposed to receive to help boost their incomes above that poverty guideline. The problem is that, first of all, the uptake has been very low. The awareness of it among the military family community is very low. And the Defense Department and Congress have chosen to, again, include the basic allowance for housing in determining eligibility for the basic needs allowance, which again puts it out of reach of most military families who are nonetheless struggling financially. So one thing that we've advocated for is increasing eligibility for the basic needs allowance to get money into the hands of families that we know are sometimes struggling to put food on the table. Beyond that, I think we're looking at policy solutions that address some of the issues that Heather identified, working on policies to support military spouse employment, working to make childcare more accessible and affordable to families, working to either reduce the number of permanent change of station moves or reduce those out-of-pocket expenses that families have to shoulder, to make it a little bit easier for military families to make ends meet, and hopefully get some of that stability that Heather referred to that is sometimes so lacking in our community.
Thank you, Eileen. This is really such an important time to have this conversation, obviously, and it's always an important time to have this conversation. But I just want to speak a little bit about the policies, a little bit more about the SNAP crisis we're all still reeling from. And I would argue that it's an ongoing crisis, since so much of this has to do with what Eileen just mentioned, which is that a lot of military families and veterans, which we will talk about in a second, are really going without the food assistance that they need. We do know that some military families are on SNAP. We do know that some veterans are on SNAP. But what really concerns MAZON is how many are unable to get even SNAP or WIC, or for many reasons. And one reason I want to add to Heather's list that we discussed, and this is both for military families and veterans, is the stigma and shame that exists. And I this is very front of mind most days these days, but especially today. I mean, the way that we're seeing policymakers talk about this program is part of the problem. I would argue. And they're adding to the stigma and shame that we see in these communities that people are, the military families and veterans who are seeking assistance from the Emergency Food Network, for instance. Most of them, many of them, are not showing up in uniform, those who wear the uniform still. They are going in plain clothes to try not to call attention to their situation, certainly trying not to out themselves as food insecure in their own communities. There are concerns about promotability. There are concerns about how does this reflect on me, which is just so unfortunate. And I would argue that everything this administration has been doing and everything they say, and every day you see them on Fox News right now talking about SNAP, and making judgments about those who receive SNAP benefits, and imposing those judgments on the American people. That just adds to the stigma and shame that we are battling against.
Well, and Liza, can I add to
Yeah,
that
go
about the
ahead,
stigma? As an active duty spouse, one thing I thought was really interesting in the data about those active duty service members who are facing food insecurity is it's not necessarily our 19 and 20-year-old super young folks with a couple kids, right? That's kind of what we think in our head, like, oh, it's these really young families. And that certainly happens. But those families who are very, very low ranking, very new, they're getting paid the least, and they can usually access things like WIC and SNAP. Where we're really seeing is those families on the line, like mine was, where you're $100 over a month and you don't qualify. And then by that point, you're usually in some sort of leadership position over other members, right? My husband, I said, is an officer, so he was in leadership. We see this in sort of our middle management in the enlisted side as well. And so you're supposed to be in the office. You're seen as this leader. So you are supposed to be the one taking care of the younger folks, not the one needing help. And if you do go ask for help, a lot of our resources in the military community rely on you going to your boss for access, right? They rely on a referral from within the active duty network. And for all of you who are civilians, imagine going to your boss who signs your promotion, who decides if you get to keep your top secret clearance, and saying, hey, I'm really struggling in my relationship. Can you help me find counseling? Hey, I'm really struggling, boss, with putting food on the table for my family, but can you trust me with that really big work project? I can do the project, but also, like, can you help me feed the wife and kids? So that when we're thinking about that stigma, you have to realize a lot of our access within the military community is reliant upon engaging our supervisors. And that's a really, really big barrier. So Liza, when you're talking about they're showing up not in uniform, it's because they don't want it to get back to their boss that they're even asking for help in the first place.
Yeah, it's such an important point.
One thing that I've observed in working on this issue for years is that a lot of people, I think, frame the issue incorrectly. They talk about, wanting to, and this is, people on the Hill, people within the department, they want to avoid the optics, I think, of military families requiring food assistance. They don't like how it looks when military families are using SNAP. And I feel like that is really dangerously misguided. And I think one thing that I've tried to do is refocus that lens and say that these are resources that families should be able to take advantage of when they find themselves in these situations. And certainly we, want service members to be paid appropriately, and they should be paid appropriately and competitively. That's a huge part of recruiting and retaining the all-volunteer force. But for all the reasons that Heather has articulated, military life comes with challenges, and a lot of those challenges are financial. And it's so important for us as leaders in the community to frame this issue appropriately. So it's not, oh gosh, isn't it terrible that military families are relying on SNAP? Isn't it great that there are SNAP benefits to support military families who find themselves in financial hardship? And that's, I think, how, and obviously everybody in this room shares that perspective, but the challenge is, I think, the challenge is, I think, making others, in decision-making roles, getting them to look at it that way as well. And, I think to Heather's point, if you are a commander, that should be part of your role as well, to be aware that, of if SNAP is not a resource, what other resources are available in your community to support the service members who are in your unit. And that was something that, for a while, that was something that was emphasized and reinforced among officers, and I'm not sure that's still the case.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to talk for a second before we leave. This is such a great conversation. The time is ticking. So I want to make sure we take a moment, because I think this is a really important piece about the complexity of these populations. And I think it's one that we as anti-hunger community don't always get right. And MAZON has really been trying to emphasize the differences and distinctions between active duty military families, someone who currently wears the uniform and deploys and all these things, moves every couple of years, and veterans, those who have transitioned out of their direct service. So it obviously, I think a food insecure active duty military family can often lead to veteran hunger. I mean, but one of the things I want to talk about is that we see a lot of the stigma and shame and just misinformation and misunderstanding about food assistance among veterans. And I think that's a really missed opportunity throughout the system, because even in the moment of transition, when someone is transitioning to civilian life and becoming no longer a service member, but a veteran, that is a moment, a really important touch point. I mean, there are a few different touch points we've identified of where we as, I guess, the US government could really intervene and socialize the idea of these programs and try to get at some of the stigma and shame that unfortunately exists. And we see that moment of transition as a real opportunity to be able to talk about food assistance. Oftentimes people have been in the military and then have to go look for a job in a way that they didn't before, or their skills don't exactly line up, or they have disability or scars that you can't always see or are not always recognized in the correct ways. So they are now subject to SNAP's onerous work requirements, for instance. And we at MAZON believe that it shouldn't, the first time someone hears about or understands that they might be eligible for food assistance should not be in a moment of crisis. That is not the goal. We want to make sure that these programs are socialized and normalized, frankly, in a way, so that they understand this is an entitlement program. For better or for worse, 42 million Americans are receiving these benefits, and it's, we want to reverse that trend of hunger in this country. Obviously, we wish it were not the case, but that is a resource that I'm very proud that my taxes go to that, and so part of it is addressing these touch points, and then of course working directly with members of Congress, the Department of Defense, the Department of the VA, all of USDA, certainly all the agencies, hopefully someday, to work together and really want to help people understand that they might be eligible for these benefits, how to access them, how to get them, help them put food on the table. And right now, I don't have to tell a room full of anti-hunger advocates, everything this administration is doing is against that goal. I mean, just today, I don't know if it's been addressed at the conference yet, but I was just seeing my email alerts and haven't even read the full report, but USDA Secretary Rollins is saying that people are going to need to reapply for their SNAP benefits. And this is not surprising, because it echoes everything she has said since day one, everything the president has done. Many members of Congress have been, through budget reconciliation and other ways, been really attacking this program in a way that we have never seen before. And I would argue that it really hurts all of us, but it in particular hurts the veterans and military families that are living in this world where these issues were stigmatized in the first place. So, the talk about fraud in this program, again, all of this is just laced with judgment for the people that utilize these services and the optics issues that Eileen was just talking about, as opposed to saying, let's see how we can best support these people so that they do not face hunger. Eileen, Heather, do you guys have anything to add before we kind of pivot to a couple questions I have for you to kick off the Q&A?
Just to say that the veteran population is in many ways much more diverse than the currently serving population, just in terms of age and the fact that they're scattered throughout the country. There are lots of veterans in rural communities and isolated communities. And it's, I think, even more so than when you're talking about active duty families who have the support of the services and have that community. We're really reliant on local anti-hunger advocates or local community organizations to include veterans in their outreach, proactively seek them out, ask those questions, to make sure that they're being connected with those resources. I know that that's something that has happened a lot, and I'm really grateful for all the work of dedicated activists in communities across the country who have been committed to working on hunger among veterans in their communities.
The barrier that I think everyone who's here for this conference would agree on, the barrier that comes with having SNAP recipients reapply. I worked for WIC and the Department of Health in both Florida and in Alaska. And Alaska is a really unique place, and a lot of our population is very remote. And so, like, for their WIC programming, they don't do even like EBT or like the WIC card for a lot of them. They fly in food boxes because these are really remote locations, and you can't even drive to them. So they have these planes that go in and they would deliver boxes of food, which is a very, old model of food and nutrition support. So when I think about my families that I helped when I lived in Alaska, and I think about getting to them and getting them to be able to reapply for their SNAP, like, it's November, snow has started falling, they are losing daylight. This is not a great time for these remote Alaskans to be coming in and trying to requalify to make sure that they have access to food to get through the winter. So that is really worrisome, in the population that I grew to love, and thinking about really that survivability of Arctic winter. If we've already had a shutdown and a hold in SNAP access, and then having them reapply somewhere like that, and some of our far northern states, like this really is a life-threatening barrier. So that is deeply concerning.
Well, and that's the word, it's a barrier, and that this is consistent since day one of this administration. Barriers, cuts, every attack possible, frankly. I want to try something. I want to try for a moment of interaction here, interactivity. We haven't really talked about the statistics, and we could talk for another hour at least about how there is not enough data. We don't have the correct data. We don't have, our government partners have not necessarily prioritized getting the right data in this, I would argue. But we do have a few data points, and there are a lot of organizations like NMFA, like MFAN, and many others that have found their own data sources. But I just want to do a quick poll if I can figure this out. So I'm going to say let's see if this works. Are you seeing this? How many military families do you think experience food insecurity? And we'll give it maybe 30 seconds to test you, as even among those who read about anti-hunger advocacy, to see what you all think. I'm seeing a few votes trickle in. Another 10 seconds to submit your vote. Not your vote, your guess, I guess. Or if you know the answer. Okay. Did I end the poll? Oops, did I submit the other one? Okay, I think I made the other one go. How many veterans do you think receive SNAP? I'm gonna end the first one and let you continue to submit your answers for the second one. And then I think I can publish them so we can see. Another 5 seconds for the question, how many veterans do you think received SNAP? Okay. And maybe, Paige, I can get your help in telling me if these are showing up for people so they can see the results.
Absolutely. Yes, they are. They say that they're closed, but we can
Okay.
still see.
Okay, great. So the answer for the first question, how many military families experience food insecurity? The answer is 24. That is a statistic that came directly from the Department of Defense. So this is not the lefty anti-hunger advocates at MAZON saying this is how many. This is DoD's own data. I think there are concerns that in some communities that number is far higher. But that is the most recent data we have from the U.S. government. The answer, go ahead, Heather.
Oh,
please.
I was just going to say, and that's our active duty. So that means our military members who are doing this full-time Monday through Friday. There is a full-time component of like Guard and Reserve, but the majority of your full-time military are your active duty. When you get into Guard and Reserve and sort of people who do it on like a part-time status or like a weekend status or sometimes full-time and sometimes not, we don't have those numbers, but we do know anecdotally that it's much higher. And the USDA did a study in 2024, I think it published. They demographically matched food insecure military members, that 24% with civilians. They're like, well, maybe it's because they're young or they're uneducated or, any number of demographic markers. And they matched them. And they found that in the civilian matched population, that food insecure rate was 10.5. And in the military, it was still 24%. So there's definitely an aspect here related to military service, to volunteer service to our country that does make you more than twice as likely to experience food insecurity. So it's definitely a conversation worth looking into.
And we didn't really touch on it that much, but we do find higher rates in the real population of concern. Strongest concern, I would say, is junior enlisted, low-ranking junior enlisted service members who have families. And this, I would argue, we talk a lot at MAZON about, this is the changing nature of our U.S. military. This is, I'm sorry, I'm going to sneeze. I think I'm going to sneeze. It's no longer just an 18-year-old kid who enlists in the military. It is often someone who goes into the military already with a family and they have mouths to feed. And this is the changing face. It's not someone who just eats in the chow hall necessarily anymore. It's often someone off base because they need more space for their kids or they want to live closer to a particular school. So there are complexities here, but that is a population of heightened concern, I would say. Turning to the second poll, that hopefully you can still see the results. The answer to how many veterans receive SNAP, the current estimates are 1.2 million. 1.2 million veterans receiving SNAP. This obviously only paints part of the picture. As I mentioned, we don't know how many veterans are going without the assistance that they likely need and deserve. So that is a huge problem, and a lot of our work at MAZON has been focused on how to address that SNAP gap among veterans. One piece I want to mention is that the recent budget reconciliation, one big beautiful bill, whatever you want to call it, that passed Congress this summer, there was debate about maintaining the SNAP work requirement exemptions for SNAP. There was a promise from House Agriculture Chairman Glenn Thompson that the bill would not harm veterans, and in the end, it did. It removed the previous exemption. So veterans, as well as former foster youth and unhoused people, are once again subject to SNAP's onerous work requirements and now broadened work requirements. So that is a huge concern. That is something that I don't even know has been communicated adequately. And that's another huge concern, that veterans were exempt from that because both parties agreed that was affecting them unjustly. And now they've gone back on that agreement, which is incredibly upsetting. Anything else to say about that? I know we only have a few minutes left, but I would love to just kick off the Q&A before we turn to any audience questions. And I don't know if audience members want to put their questions in the chat, if you have any, but I just want to ask you both, and we can, whoever wants to start. I was hoping that you could, what do you, I hope you can answer the question, what do you wish that policymakers and perhaps others, maybe members of the media or the general public, but I'm particularly thinking about policymakers, what do you wish people would understand about veterans and military families who are struggling with food insecurity?
Well, I'll start, and I know Heather will have a lot to say about this also, but I wish every policymaker could listen to Heather's really compelling and articulate description of the unique aspects of military life that put us more at risk for food insecurity, and understand that it's not a question of budgeting. It's not a question of poor choices or poor financial management. It is the fact that in a situation where a large number of our families are trying to get by with one income and facing expenses associated with frequent moves, not able to accumulate the kind of wealth that families who can stay in one place and progress in their careers and, not, as Heather said, constantly have to, move and not be able to let your rent kind of catch up with the cost of living. There are really solid reasons why military families are going to struggle with financial hardship, and our policies and our compensation approach have to reflect those realities of military life.
I
Heather, same question to you.
Yeah, I echo all of that Eileen shared, and also sort of two things. One, the military and these families and these Americans and these people, these men and women who sign up to give their life for this country are a small sample of the rest of our country. We also deal with mental health issues. We also deal with LGBTQ members of our family. We also deal with racism in different places. We deal with the same thing as a country, as Americans, are happening within our military community. We're not in a bubble and immune from that. So we have to have dynamic policies that allow us to change with the changing picture of what American families look like. They're multi-generational, they're non-traditional. We need to have policies that allow us to support those families in whatever that looks like. It's not, dad off at war and mom, pregnant and barefoot in the kitchen. That's not the reality of what it looks like now. So one, we have to keep that in mind, that the military isn't different than the rest of the country. And also one thing, this is a hill that I will die on, is that I don't care. And this is something I hear a lot in people who don't get it in food insecurity. You either get it and you're like, oh my gosh, that's terrible, or you just don't get it. I very rarely run into people who are neutral on the topic. And so for those who just don't really understand, I hear a lot, well, isn't this something they did to themselves? Or shouldn't they be budgeting better? Or some other variation of, did they try not being poor? And I don't really care. I don't care if somebody made poor decisions. They aren't less deserving of help and resources to help them support their family and move forward with confidence and with dignity. You don't lose your value as a human being. You don't lose your entitlement to food, even if you did make bad decisions. I don't care. If you're willing to die for our country, you get resources, you get help, and we're going to make sure that you can do better in the future, whether this is something where you slip through gaps in our systems, or if this is something that you did to yourself. I don't really care. You as a human being have inherent value, and you deserve to eat with dignity. So those are kind of two things I would say, is we're not different from the regular Americans. Also, even if it was poor decision making, you are still deserving of help because you're a human being with value.
Here, here.
Here, here. Amen. I think that is the best note to end on. I'm not seeing any questions unless Paige, you're seeing any questions from the chat come in or other channels that you might have that I'm not seeing. But I cannot thank my friends Eileen and Heather enough. I hope you all join me in showing your appreciation for these amazing women and all of the amazing people that they work with who are doing this work day in and day out. These stories are really incredible. And I'm just so delighted that we were able to come together to talk about this. And I hope we will have many more opportunities to work on this together with anti-hunger advocates around the country. Please be in touch. We can put our information in the chat or follow it up. Please reach out. I'm happy to connect you to either of them or those that they work with around the country, because I think this is an area that this problem is not going anywhere, unfortunately. And I think we need to all come together to support our military families, our veterans, and anyone who faces hunger. So with that, I will pass it over to Paige to close this out.
Thank you so much, speakers. I really appreciate your time. Up next, we have a 15-minute break, so please be sure to check out the on-demand content or to visit our sponsors' exhibitor booths. We will see you back here at 3:45 Eastern Time for your choice of one of 3 sessions. To join one of these 3 sessions, please click Agenda in your navigation bar to the left of your screen, and then be sure to click the right arrow to scroll through all of the available sessions. And with that, that concludes our time together. Please have a wonderful rest of your day.